Aspiring surgeon Ladvinia Woodward met her boyfriend on Tinder. He should have swiped left. She swiped a bread knife and stabbed him in the leg in a drugged and drunken rage. How's that for tender love? Judge Pringle was so impressed by Woodward's carving skills, he decided to give her a pass on jail so that others could go under her knife as well. Would you like to go first? Picture the following. You are at a public bus stop. Two other people are there, Person A and Person B. Person A says something degrading and sexually explicit to a complete stranger, Person B. Person B, shocked, offended, outraged, hauls off and slaps Person A across the face, hard. Have you unconsciously assigned genders to the two people, male for A and female for B? If I told you A, whose words were so offensive, was female, and B, who experienced A's act of verbal abuse, was male, would you be less comfortable with the slap B dealt to A? Would you judge B for being offended, instead of A for being rude? In reality, what both individuals did in the situation was abusive and aggressive, but regardless of the sexes of those involved, with nothing more than words coming from Person A, Person B's reaction was an unjustified and unnecessary escalation from rudeness to violence. Most men's advocates and activists, especially those whose focus is on issues surrounding intimate partner and sexual violence, already know the sex of the individual taking an action doesn't change its nature. But what about the rest of society? There are several videos on YouTube showing the general public's tendency to respond differently to violence depending on whether it's perpetrated by a man or a woman. The response to sexual violence is even more stark. When a woman accuses a man of sexual violence, the public doesn't even always wait for evidence before engaging in condemnation and often even aggression against the accused. When a man accuses a woman, he faces a range of unsympathetic reactions, including gay shaming, being mocked as a wimp, being accused of lying, being treated as an invader of a female issue, and his experience being minimized in comparison to that of women. Of course, that's the perception of the unwashed masses, right? What about the more educated? There's clearly gender disparity here. Doesn't that make this a feminist issue? So, how have feminists addressed it? Not so well, actually. Rather than study violence as a dysfunctional human behavior which must be addressed with an eye toward prevention, feminist researchers and other academics sought to suppress evidence of female perpetration and emphasize or even exaggerate male perpetration. The methods used to achieve this have been exposed by numerous critics, including Eugene Koenen, a retired sociology professor from Purdue University, quoted in October of 1993 by the Toledo Blade, describing feminist sexual violence prevalence research as highly convoluted activism rather than social science. That article also included criticism by researcher Margaret Gordon of the University of Washington, who classified herself as a feminist but vehemently disagreed with the direction feminist-led sexual violence prevalence research was taking. She said, "There was some pressure, at least I felt pressure, to have rape be as prevalent as possible." Gordon's study, which used direct questions and found that 1 in 50 women had been raped or sexually assaulted, was largely ignored by feminists in favor of higher prevalence findings. Berkeley social welfare professor Neil Gilbert set off protests at his university by publishing an article pointing out that bad methodology had led some feminists to exaggerate the rate of rape and other sexual violence. What had he dared to criticize? Researchers had used questions designed to ignore respondents' assessment of their own experiences and impose feminist beliefs instead, resulting in findings in which the researcher applied the label rape where 3/4 of their respondents did not, and nearly half had further relations with their supposed rapists. Christina Hoff Sommers, also cited in the article, has made a career of criticizing feminism's approach to these issues. She tore apart the researcher whose method ultimately became the standard for feminist sexual violence prevalence research, Mary Koss, whose survey question template led the charge in writing feminist beliefs over women's experiences. It wasn't until the 21st century, however, that Koss was called out on the other egregious aspect of her design, defining rape to exclude female perpetrators who victimize men or boys by excluding victims who were forced to penetrate, also known as forcibly enveloped, by their attackers. Under Koss's definition, a female perpetrator who imposes herself on a male victim through coitus or fellatio is not labeled a rapist. Instead, the behavior gets dumped into other sexual assault, the same category as things like groping. How's that for minimizing an experience? They haven't done any better with intimate partner violence. Feminist researchers even have a label for female-perpetrated partner assault against a male victim: preemptive self-defense.
But he was totally going to be asking for it eventually.
The incredible bias in feminist-led partner violence research was best exposed by Murray Strauss in his report, Gender Symmetry and Partner Violence: Implications for Prevention and Treatment. Tom Golden provided a great summary of Strauss's revelations in his article, Strauss Exposes the Academic Veils Placed on Domestic Violence Research. He pointed out that feminists use biased research, selective suppression of information, false framing, and outright lies to manipulate partner violence research findings. The question is, why the hell would they do that? Erin Pitsey, speaking publicly, has explained this numerous times. As she discovered when she founded the shelter movement, it is easy to get funding to assist the rescue and recovery of female victims of violent men, a fact second-wave feminists latched onto and capitalized on rather quickly. It is, however, damned near impossible to do the same for male victims of violent women, and not just when asking private donors. The official response to female violence is also dramatically different from the response to male violence. In their report, The Help-Seeking Experiences of Men Who Sustain Intimate Partner Violence, an Overlooked Population and Implications for Practice, Emily M. Douglas and Denise A. Hines disclosed that while family members and mental health care professionals can be supportive, police and victim services organizations are a different story. The researchers reported that male victims of female abusers faced bias and discrimination at every turn. Upon seeking abuse victims' agencies and hotline assistance, they were sometimes rebuffed with the explanation that the service was only for female victims, sometimes accused of lying, and even of being perpetrators, sometimes ridiculed, and sometimes referred to batterer programs, even if they weren't labeled abusers. Upon seeking police assistance, they faced the possibility of being ignored, ridiculed, or even arrested. The report went on to state, within the judicial system, some men who sustained intimate partner violence reported experiencing gender-stereotyped treatment. Even with apparent corroborating evidence that their female partners were violent and that the help seekers were not, they reportedly lost custody of their children, were blocked from seeing their children, and were falsely accused by their partners of intimate partner violence and abusing their children. According to some, the burden of proof for male intimate partner violence victims may be especially high. On a side note, the National Organization for Women uses portrayal of fathers as abusers in their arguments against equally shared parenting laws. But according to statistics from the U.S. Health and Human Services Department, the majority of children abused by one parent have historically been abused by their mothers. Victims of female sexual violence don't necessarily fare any better than those of female partner violence, even when they are underage. Government-sponsored research, such as the Centers for Disease Control's National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, uses Mary Koss's female perpetrator-excluding rape definition to avoid having to report the rate of rape perpetrated by women. The researchers don't even know why they're using that definition. The following is an excerpt from the phone call during which I found that out.
Regarding the male respondents reporting being forced to penetrate, well, it didn't really give a very clear reason why that was treated differently than when a female is forcibly penetrated. Do you have some explanation on that?
The reports define the made to penetrate variable, like it's in the 2010 report as well. There's a box that kind of describes how those variables were measured in this.
Well, what it does is it just basically says that that was excluded from the definition of rape.
Rape there is a definition of rape, and it's a separate form of victimization than the made to penetrate. And if you look at the published reports, it shows how the rape was defined and how made to penetrate was defined. And these are also in line with the CDC uniform, definitions for sexual violence.
But what was the criteria for deciding that being made to penetrate wasn't rape, whereas being forcibly penetrated was?
As I said, they described how they were measured, and for more, sort of background information in the field on how the different definitions of rape, and actually we're the first survey to actually include this made to penetrate. But you can there's experts and processes from all over the country going back several years in terms of trying to get ideas of how to measure these constructs in surveys, and that's why we do go with all the behaviorally specific victimization questions. And we measured several types of sexual violence victimization in the survey, based on those very specific. There's like 60 different victimization questions we asked.
The team has responded to being alerted to this bias by ceasing to report the sex of respondents' alleged perpetrators. In the court system, female perpetrators are not treated as harshly as male perpetrators. In separate studies, Sonia Starr, an assistant law professor at the University of Michigan, and Jill K. Donner, a Bowling Green State University student doing research for her doctoral thesis, found that convicted men receive much longer sentences than women convicted of the same crimes with the same basic details. Starr found similar disparity at every step of the process, from police response, where women are less likely to be arrested, to time served, where women are more likely to see rehabilitative therapies substituted for incarceration, and if incarcerated, to serve less of their sentences, already shorter than those imposed on men, before being released. Male victims of female rapists face an additional injustice that is unique to their sex. While female victims of a rape in which a child is conceived have adoption, abortion, and safe haven abandonment as means to avoid having parental responsibility imposed against their will as a result of the rape, fathers do not have the advantage of having physical custody at birth. A male rape victim whose rapist conceives a child with him during the crime faces the possibility that not only will his rapist have custody of his child from birth, she can use the child support system to extort money from him as long as she retains that custody, even if the father is underage. Even if he is so far underage that he cannot legally earn the money to pay that debt. Ask Shane Sayer, forced to pay child support to his rapist after conceiving at the ripe old age of 13. Often, when men's issues activists discuss this information, the only response we get is bombardment with increasingly crappy excuses. Feminists blame their shoddy research methods on men's hesitance to report being victimized. Official responses to female perpetration are blamed on prevalent attitudes and beliefs about gender, which feminist advocates are quick to call symptoms of a patriarchal system. But who is stopping that system from modernizing its approach? Groups like the National Organization for Women actively promote some of the myths surrounding gender disparity in sentencing, in conjunction with advocating lighter and alternative sentencing for only women. These same groups' advocacy led to the enactment of the Violence Against Women Act, which promotes Duluth's patriarchal dominance theory on partner violence and contains federal financial incentives for policies which promote mandatory arrest, prosecution, conviction, sentencing, and sentence enforcement, all of which primarily affect accused men, due to the use of that Duluth model. The result? At every turn, social, institutional, and legal barriers hinder victims of female perpetrators of violence who seek support, escape, protection, and justice. This has led to an environment which perpetuates cycles of violence rather than providing a means to end them. It endangers both sexes. Research shows that female-initiated intimate partner and sexual violence either directly or indirectly contributes significantly to harm experienced by both sexes. This indicates that at every level, from the personal to the institutional, Eliminating society's blind spot toward female violence could go a long way toward reducing the overall incidence of intimate partner and sexual violence. In fact, it may be fair to say the biggest hurdle between anti-violence activists from all facets of the political spectrum and potential success in their efforts is that bias. Together with Karen Strawn and the adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, to rip the bandage off of society's blind spot, female violence. So, who wants to take the first whack at it?
Well, I think Prim might want to go first today.
Sure,
Yes?
I can take a stab at that.
Oh, yeah. No, just beat the shit out of that. Just
Absolutely.
beat the absolute ever-loving shit out of it. Go ahead,
Okay.
Prim.
At my crisis hotline, we have training for the new volunteers that involves a classroom portion and a role play portion in which leadership volunteers, which is what I am currently, help facilitate fake calls so that new people can get used to what the general structure of a call looks like. Lately, I've been doing role plays for the domestic violence section of the role plays. So usually I'm responsible for about 3 to 4 new volunteers, and I'm always careful to tell them that I always try to make equal opportunity scenarios, like such as discussing female victims, male victims, hetero and homosexual domestic violence situations where either one or both parties are perpetuating violence. I've had so many new volunteers tell me, "Oh, I never considered the possibility of these kinds of things happening," when discussing mutual violence, especially between lesbian couples, despite this being one of the most common domestic violence scenarios. And I even get people being hesitant to act out calls in which a woman is the perpetrator of violence. Also, the role play section happens after the classroom portion, which I feel is an important thing to mention, because it means that these scenarios aren't really getting discussed in the classroom portion, at least not as much as the stereotypical scenario offered up. Now, I obviously can't ethically discuss details of any real calls, but let me assure you that we do get calls just like the examples that I talked about. And even when these calls come up and we present the information to our supervisors, they often still react with surprise when they hear about female perpetrators of violence. I have mentioned this to the training coordinator that these scenarios should be presented more often in training because as people who are regularly dealing with crisis situations, there's really no excuse for these scenarios to be eliciting surprise from people, especially when they're as common as they are. I don't want to talk down about this service because I think that what we do is extremely important and we still do our best to help anyone who calls, but this is one area in which I think that we could stand to improve.
All right, agreed. And I find it, I've always found it kind of interesting that people react with surprise to things like that because, and I still remember watching on the TV, and this was back before my family had cable. This was way back in the mid 80s or something like that. It was a made-for-TV movie with Peter Strauss, who was sort of a B-list actor back then, and Judith Leitner or something like that. She was the female lead on that Tony Danza vehicle, Who's the Boss? And it was called, oh God, Men Don't Tell. And it was a movie about a domestic violence situation in which the man was the victim, and he went through all of those things, phoning crisis lines and sort of having people sort of nervously laugh at them and say, "Are you joking?" Like just absolute. Or either that or responding with hostility and telling him to stop beating his wife and hanging up and things like that, right? And one thing that really struck me, because you can actually watch the entire movie. It's a typical made-for-TV movie. It's not great, right? But it was groundbreaking, obviously, for its time. I think it only aired once on broadcast TV. Only the one time.
Wow.
It was never repeated. And yeah, so essentially what you have is this situation where, like, and it always kind of shocked me that people would react with surprise given what I have experienced in my life, and not with my family, because my family is so unbelievably nonviolent that, like, I've never heard my mom or dad, either one of them, tell the other to shut up. Let alone, use verbal abuse, let alone use physical abuse on each other, right? So essentially, I grew up in this very peaceful, teamwork-oriented home, but my experience of intimate partner violence in other people's lives, I've known more before I even got into the men's rights stuff, right? This was one of the reasons why I got into the men's rights stuff, was because once I realized that this sort of idea of that women are never violent, right? Never violent because they're angry, never violent because they're mean, never violent because they're abusive, never violent, if women are ever violent, it is self-defensive violence. And that's even when we're talking about when women initiate violence, right? They are defending themselves from his anticipated violence, right? It's preemptive self-defense, right? So when I realized that that was actually something that existed within the law and the policies surrounding domestic violence, and then I thought about the fact that I know more men who get, at that point, I knew more men who had been beaten by their wives than the other way around, right? That really, really, really struck me. And the whole idea that me, just a person who works in a kitchen, right, as a cook, knew more men who had been physically attacked by their wives, who had been physically attacked with a weapon by their wives, who had been beaten up by their wives, who had come into work covered in bruises and scratches thanks to their wife, right? And at that point, I had only ever known women who had dealt with verbal abuse, psychological abuse, and stuff from their men. That when I ask them, "Are you okay? Does he ever hit you?" They're like, "No, no, 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 nothing like that. He's just controlling, or he just, he's just jealous, right? But he's never laid a finger on me." Like, how are people not seeing that this is going on? The only thing I can think of is that they're not seeing it because it's something that they will not see.
Yeah. I just want I volunteer at, nobody would ever respond to a scenario where a man is being abused with dismissiveness or hostility. But it does really bother me that some people are still surprised when the situation comes up, like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And the kinds of resources that we can offer to people, to men in that situation, are markedly reduced compared to what we can offer to women, obviously. But another thing that I wanted to mention was, it really sets my teeth on edge when people say that women can't be violent, because I grew up from my early childhood years being physically and emotionally abused by my stepmother. So basically, most of my formative years were spent knowing nothing but female violence. So I definitely know that it happens. So anybody that says something like that can just piss off.
Yeah, this is something that hit home in my area not too long ago. Actually, just a few years ago, there was a woman here in the Dayton metro area who microwaved her baby.
Jesus Christ.
Oh my God! What the
And
fuck?
The horror of it was she just did it, and afterwards, the best excuse that she could come up with, the absolute most stellar defense that she could come up with in court, was that she couldn't have done it because she was too drunk. And she tried to blame her son. and
Um,
for having microwaved, and of
how,
course
how,
the baby
how,
did die.
how old was her son that she
This
tried to
was this
blame?
was an elementary school kid she tried to
Oh
blame.
my fucking God.
And this actually was a huge controversy in the area, because there were people who, of course, you can't hurt a baby without people recognizing its violence. There will, even if there are a lot of people who dismiss female violence, when a baby is the one that gets hurt and a child is getting blamed for it, and alcohol is your only excuse, it starts to build up, to where there's at least a segment of the population that will not dismiss it. And then there were people trying to excuse, it was an alcohol problem. This is a tragedy. This poor woman lost her baby, blah, blah, blah. And oh my God, you cannot imagine how angry the rest of us got that could see this is a violent act. This was a torturous death for an infant.
You know what I'm gonna do. Okay. I am gonna say, and I'm going to say something like controversial here. I'm going to say something, okay, if you have to fucking kill your baby, if that is something that your entire being is telling you must do, what the fuck? The microwave. I had to kill my dog. I had to do that with my own hands, and I figured out a way to do it humanely. Right? I didn't fucking stick my dog in the microwave or back over it 8 times with a car or strangle it with a pair of fucking panties and throw it over the fence. No, I did it in a humane fucking, like, that's not just killing a baby. That is torturing. A fucking,
This is not the only one. There's been other recent news stories that have been just absolutely evil like that. And of course, we hear about these things, and every time, we are shocked, and it is shocking. That degree of violence, that degree of cruelty is always shocking. It's shocking no matter who does it. But people always seem to be more surprised when they find out that it was done by a woman.
Well, they find it impossible to believe that a woman would be capable of that kind of cruelty, and I'm here to tell you that that's not the fucking case. That is absolutely not the fucking case. Women can be the meanest, cuntiest, most ruthless, high-flying bitches, right, that you have ever met. A woman will fucking ruin your life and
gloat.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. I can tell you about gloating.
She'll get pissed if it's not ruined after she's tried.
Yeah.
I tried to tell my dad one time about a bruise on my arm that appeared from who, and he tried to accuse her of it, and she's like, oh, well, she's obviously lying. And then after that, she's like, she was doing something, I don't remember exactly what it was, but we were in the garage, and she said at one point, oh, you just go try and tell your dad and he'll believe me, and then what are you going to do after that? And I just didn't even know what to say, because I'm like a 10-year-old kid, so what the hell am I going to do, right?
This kind of stuff, just when I hear about this stuff, it always makes my blood boil. I don't know if it's an instinct or if it's just me, if it's the way I was raised, if it's I don't know what it is, but when I hear about people harming kids and being mean to kids on purpose, it makes my blood boil. And there was I can't remember what the incident was. Somebody posted about on Twitter where somebody had done something terrible to an infant, and I burned the infant. That's what it was. Burned the infant with the hot part of a cigarette lighter, and the judge didn't give her a pass either. He lectured her and gave her, he sentenced her, and I can't remember the sentence. I just remember reading about the burns, and it's because that's what made the starkest impression. Burn the baby's wrists. And I'm sitting there, they protected the identity of the perpetrator in the news media. And everybody was talking about, why would they do that? Why would they do that? Well, maybe it was because I'm not the only person whose blood boils when I hear about somebody hurting children. Maybe it's to protect the public. Maybe it's to protect people from flying off the handle when they learn that their neighbor did something like that and ending up in jail for acting before they think. And because it's hard not to sometimes.
I actually think that most of the time when they do not disclose the name of the perpetrator, because they do this in spousal sexual assault trials and things like that, it's to protect the identity of the victim.
Yeah.
Right.
And the child, of course, is the identity of the child would come out if the identity of the abusive mother came out.
Yes, and same with spousal rape and things like that. If you name the husband, everybody knows who the victim is, right? Mm-hmm. So, essentially, that I think that's probably why they do it. Honestly, I think that that it's just as well that we don't necessarily know who some of these people are. But what I have found, at least in Canada, is that it's only when the child is still alive, or there is one child, or some of the children are still alive, that the perpetrator's identity is concealed. If all the children are dead, they name the fucking bitch or bastard, right? They name him because there's nothing to protect there anymore. That these children are dead, right? So that's generally why I think it's not to prevent vigilante justice. I will say that
it would be wise to prevent vigilante justice, because there are circumstances, and it was like, I have a hot temper, and I spent years and years learning to control it, but I know a lot of people haven't. I got to answer Godwin's Outlaw here, said hot part of a lighter. The flame, when the story that I read made it look like she had gotten the part the flame comes out of hot. With some lighters, that part, when you flick the lighter, it gets really hot.
Yeah.
And there were circle burns on the child. So I don't know if it was a lighter that had a flame that came out and that's what she did, or if it was one of those lighters that the end of it has a heat light in it instead of an actual flame. All I know is that I do
might have been a car
understand.
lighter.
Well, it could have been, but I do totally understand people reacting in the heat of the moment like that. I do not advocate vigilante violence. Click Accept says Hannah has a temper. I never saw it. If I have my way, you never will.
Well, my issue with these, because people, and I mean, like, there are stories that, like I remember screaming. It was probably the only time I've ever really screamed at my had ever really screamed at my ex. And I essentially screamed at him, "Why would you tell me that?" And I just burst into tears, and I just left the house and went for a walk. And he was reading me this tiny little blurb of a news article about, it was about a carjacking in the US. And the person who was being carjacked was a woman who had a 5 or 6 year old child in the back seat in a booster seat belted in, and she went to take him out and he got caught up in the seat belt, and the carjacker just drove off with this kid just dragging on the ground behind the car. And I think he came loose from the seat belt when his leg detached. And he was dead long before that, and, stripped completely naked from the pavement, and, had been screaming the entire time. And that was the end of the fucking article, right? Like, they hadn't caught the guy. They didn't have any suspects, right? There was no resolution to this fucking case. So it was just this horror story, right? About this child. And I was like, why would you fucking read that to me? Like, why would you even tell me something like that? Like, there's not even somebody fucking hanged for it at the end. No, nothing. It's just a kid who's dead in the most horrific way. And I just, like, why would you fucking tell me that? And I was like so upset. I think I just had, I was postpartum with our third child at the time. And it just really upset me. But what bothers me the most about these cases of these horrific things is everybody can agree that men are capable of doing that. There are men, not men are, but there are men who are capable of doing these really horrific, egregious, horrible, cruel things, right? And the moment that you suggest that there are women, and, you know, possibly a similar number of women who are dysfunctional enough people, right, who've had the kind of upbringing, right, in a home with their brother who turned out that way, right, to be capable of doing these things. Everybody acts like you've grown a second head, right? You've sprouted horns and webbed feet, and you started quacking like a duck, and you just announced that the moon's made out of cheese.
God
right?
forbid that you point out that women can be sociopaths and act that way, or psychopaths and act that way, even if they were brought up perfectly well.
Well, not even
Yeah.
trying to imply that this is a thing that's common to women, just even saying it,
Yeah.
just saying that women are capable of doing terrible things, just like everybody else, because, surprise, they're human. People just lose their damn minds over it.
Well, and then you have these feminists who, you know, like Anita Sarkeesian, when I have to go online every day and defend my right to be human, right? And it's like, okay, you know what? Do you know what a human is? It's a glorified fucking chimp with a better fucking all body Brazilian wax.
Well, and the right to be human is imperfect. We're not gods, we're not angels, we're not sculptures that somebody made that they worked on and until perfection and preserved. We're animals. We're living organisms. We make mistakes, we learn, we can have good ideas, we can have bad ideas, we can have good character, we can have bad character.
We fuck up all the time. Have a very good capacity for back rationalizing a good reason, a rational reason why we made the decision that we did while we were on autopilot. And it's just like, we don't, to even think that we are capable of being, you know, 100, anybody, any of us is capable of being 100% good, or 95% good, or 80% good, or 70% good. Right? That's just insane.
No,
right?
we aren't good, we aren't evil. We aren't anything.
Yeah, like
either.
we
just
are, you know, and like, so what frustrates me too, right? And this isn't just an institutional bias. It's not just about law, it's not just about policy, right? It's all the way in there. It's all the way down into our wiring. You know, when you have a study done with psychologists where they give them, you know, 50 random abusive scenarios, like he won't let me leave that, he won't let me go out with my friends unless he approves of who I'm going with and where we're going, or she's always, she insists on having all of my passwords to my email and my phone and my Facebook and everything because she wants to keep tabs on me, right? And they do all of these little scenarios, right? And they just reverse the genders at random. And they find that psychologists, Clinical psychologists are 50% more likely to label any given scenario as abusive if it's the man doing the abusing than if it's the woman doing it to a man.
In fact, just judging by the way the literature is coming out of many domestic violence victims advocacy agencies, they will label things that really aren't necessarily abusive, things that they'll blanket label behaviors that occasionally can have good reason and sometimes can have bad reason. They'll ignore reason as being the thing that makes the label abusive or not abusive.
Well,
and they will go forward with, if it's a man doing it, it's abuse. If it's a woman doing it, it's not. So there will be things like, my husband and I, if we go places where we're going to be away from home for hours and hours, or we're going a distance, we let each other know that we're okay, because we love each other and we don't want each other to worry, and each of us knows the other will. And it's not abusive to expect that.
Mm-hmm.
When a man expects it, a lot of these agencies will treat it the same as if he's checking up on her to make sure she's under his control.
Yeah, he's keeping tabs on her, and it's like Augusto Zimmerman said in the press conference or whatever at the ICMI, is that say a man, a husband decides that there won't be a joint bank account, and I know one man, my mom, a couple of her friends, Irene and John, they're both deceased now. But John had been married before he met Irene, and his ex-wife had essentially, she had access to everything. She maxed out all the credit cards. She emptied the bank account. She cashed in all the GICs and the bonds and everything and investments that they had, right? And left him. And it was literally a situation like in that movie True Lies, where what's his name, the fat guy who was married to Roseanne Barr, says, she took the ice cube trays. She took the ice cube trays out of the freezer. What kind of sick bitch takes the ice cube trays, right? She literally left him with nothing but hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and disappeared. Okay. And so when he got with Irene, who decided unilaterally that she was not going to have a job, he was not willing to have the family finances in a joint bank account. He was burned once, burned extremely severely. And there was no way he was going to let his new wife have access to any of that, right? He always took very good care of them. He always made sure that there was a bank account in her name that had plenty of money in it, all of those things, right? And she chain smoked 2 packs a day, and he paid for her habits and all of that stuff, right? He didn't mind paying for her. Right? He didn't mind supporting her. He just did not want her to be able to screw him like he was screwed before. And Augusto Zimmerman said, what if you're a man and you don't want to have a joint bank account? You want to limit her access to the money, not because you're a controlling bastard, right? But maybe she has a gambling problem. Maybe she has a drinking problem. Maybe she pays for porn. I have a friend of mine, her freaking husband, she caught him again, like spending money on porn. She's like, why is he doing this? We're late on the rent. I don't understand. We're struggling with money. He's paying for porn. Who the fuck pays for porn, right? And she wants all of his passwords, right? And she wants him to have no access to the family money, right? Because he's going to spend it on fucking porn. He's going to spend it on cam girls. And he's like, I don't care that he's looking at porn. I don't even care that he's looking at cam girls, right? But he's spending money we don't have on it, right? And she earns half the fucking money in the house, more than half, right? She's not interested in, not being able to make the rent or make the car payment because he's fucking spent $750 on porn this month and cam girls, right? So what if you have a situation like that where it's not abusive of the one partner to take control of the finances? I don't think it would be abusive of my friend to say, yeah, no, from now on, here, you get this amount of money every month. You can fucking blow it on porn. And the rest of it is under my control and it's going to bills, right? I don't think that's abusive, right? I actually think that the overspender, the compulsive gambler who's spending more money than the family can afford is being the abusive one.
Well, and
Society recognizes that when the overspender is a man. They don't recognize it when the overspender is a woman. But but you are correct. That is an abusive thing to do, and I've seen it happen in numerous relationships. And a lot of times, with women, it takes their most ridiculous form of, I saved so much money by buying this thing that I wouldn't have bought if it hadn't been on sale.
Yeah.
No, you didn't save money. You spent $500. It doesn't matter if it would have cost $3,000 to buy it new. We didn't have the $500.
Yeah.
And this is something that a lot of people don't get it. A lot of people don't understand that there are times when, you have to take control of the finances. I had an ex that didn't understand the difference between spending $5 out of the checking account one time and writing 10 different checks for $5. That one was $5 and the other was $50. And we would end up short of the rent, and I couldn't get him to understand when you write a check, you subtract it from the balance. And it was just a disconnect. It was, somebody that grew up in a house where the parents never taught that information and never taught budgeting, and everything was done for them. And it took quite a long time to remedy that. And during the time that those lessons were being learned, those budgeting lessons were being learned, because I didn't want to be the change purse holder forever, but that's what I basically was doing. I was the one that had control of the checking account. We both paid into it. I paid the bills, and then I said how much money was left over, which was usually none. But this isn't something that gets tolerated if a man does it.
No,
in fact, men can be ordered under some circumstances to earn more money so that their wives can spend it.
Yeah, are able to spend it on the things that they want, the clothes and the shoes and the new furniture and the this, that, and the other. And it's infuriating to me. And it's infuriating to me that so many women that I know have this cavalier attitude. And, my friend who is, dealing with her husband and his porn addiction, right? And dealing with, because she just started a business, she's just started taking on employees. And, so she's essentially, and she just paid off her vehicle. She they're in the middle of a consumer proposal that they're trying to pay off early so that they can buy a house. Right. And they're doing all of this stuff. Right. And so, when she's stuck in that position where she is working so hard, she's volunteering with the kids' hockey league. She's essentially, she's their fundraising coordinator and all of this, right? She's working all kinds of hours because of the way her business works. A lot of the work that she does is between 8 p.m. and 2 a.m., right? And she gets them to school, and she has a garden in the back of their rental property, right? So, she's put in raised beds, she grows vegetables, she does all of this stuff, right? In order to save money. And then, so she really knows the value of that money. She really understands what has to be done to get that money, that $750 that he handed to cam girls this month. Right. That is, I think, because she has to work so hard for it. I think she's in the position of a lot of guys, but a lot of women are never in that position. A lot of women are not in the position of being the stable earner in their household. A lot of women even these days, the man's income is what goes towards all the necessities, the bills, everything. Her income goes toward the nice living room suite that you want, or a vacation, or, you know, dinner out, or, you know, the luxuries, right? Generally, a lot of the women that I know who are married, they don't experience, even if they are winning bread, they don't experience that breadwinner role the same way that their husband does, where the entire household is depending on them to provide that money, or, you know, the lights go out, the water gets turned off, and then the house gets foreclosed on. And so I think that so many women who are in that position of, I want money, he's controlling the money, right? And he won't let me have as much money as I want, and blah, 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 right? Mm-hmm. They're coming at it from a position where they've never had to experience being in his shoes. And they don't care what it would feel like being in his shoes.
You know, I think that... Oh, go ahead, go ahead, Prim.
That just makes me think of something else. Just how you said a lot of women have never had to be in that position, and when they are, they see it as abusive. It just leads me to think of a lot of scenarios in which certain situations are called abusive, even though by all normal accounts they're not abusive. Like say a couple has had a stressful string of events and they're arguing, they're raising their voices at each other, but otherwise they're not calling each other names. They're just getting stressed out, as is normal in relationships. But like, for example, she might call in to a crisis line and say, oh, I'm being abused because my significant other is raising his voice at me. And that kind of thing happens all the time. Behaviors that are seen as normal, if they're done towards the woman, like oftentimes they'll see it in themselves as, oh my gosh, I'm being abused, even though it's not really what counts as the standard definition of abuse, you know?
Yeah. No, what frustrates me too is that because it really frustrates me that, like what you said about, or I don't know if it was you, about a woman who, you know, had hit her husband, and she claimed that it was just, you know, she'd never hit him before. I'm not sure if it was you, Prim. She claimed that she'd never hit him before. It was just a one-time thing, blah, 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 blah. I don't think that's abuse. I think we have to draw a line, as blurry as it might be, between an act of violence and an act of abuse, right? Because in my opinion, abuse is a pattern of behavior, right? It is something that is, it is ongoing. It escalates. It's constant, right? So, you know, that one time that your mom or my mom got so mad because we did, like, okay, let me explain.
My gaming friend, actually, I think that might have been that was something I may have vented to you about at one point.
Yeah.
Who she can be abusive. I don't think she recognizes that she is.
Well,
but she does have a pattern of behavior, but hitting is not a normal part of it.
Well, what I want to get at, right, is that, let me just put it this way. I was looking after, this was actually on the road trip that I went down to Idaho to rescue my friend and her 4-year-old son from her abusive husband. And we were driving back, and this kid was being an absolute maniac the entire trip. I mean, like, we were on the ferry to Vancouver Island, and he was picking up the ashtrays, out of their holders on the outer deck and throwing them up into the air at people and things like that, right? Like, he was just he was walking around on the backs of the booths at Wendy's and running around and just being he was out of control. Okay, and this is a kid who had never actually ever had to have his hand held on the sidewalk. This kid never ran out into the street, never in his entire life. We were in Campbell River, stopping at KFC to get something to eat. And we were walking back to the car with the food, and he just bolts, right? And his mom is 4 months pregnant, and he bolts out onto the highway. It was literally, at that time, it was the highway. And almost gets hit by a car. And she chases after him and grabs him and pulls him out of the path of this car and falls down and barks her elbow and hurts her back and the whole bit, right? And I went out, I grabbed that kid by the arm, right? In front of a whole bunch of people, right? Grabbed him by the arm, lifted him up with one hand, and he was a big boy. He was a big 4-year-old. Carried him to the van, and then I laid about 12 really hard smacks on his ass, and then I slammed him into his car seat and buckled him in and told him he wasn't getting anything to eat until we got up to Port McNeill, right? And then I looked around and I see all these people looking, and I just looked around at them with this look on my face, like, I dare you to fucking say anything, right? And then I went and I picked my friend up off the highway and got her into the van. Now, that, I don't think, is some indication that I have some kind of abusive personality. That reaction to two people almost being hit by a car because this kid was just being an absolute terror for a day and a half, 2 days, right? And then he was fine. And it's like, we're home. Oh my goodness. And it was just like, but that was an extreme situation. It was an extreme circumstance, and I reacted in an extreme way, right? And you might take an issue with the fact that I hit him that many times or that hard on his bum, right? But I guarantee you, the artificial consequences I gave him were much less severe than the natural ones that would come from what he did, right? And I don't think that shows that I have a pattern of abusing children, because I almost never have ever swatted my kids' bottoms or anything like that, right? I think that you have to be able to separate incidents like that, right? Incidents like Mark Mir Karimi or whatever, the sheriff down in California who grabbed his wife's arm when she said she wanted to take their son to Venezuela to visit family, and he's all of a sudden getting flashbacks of his mother taking him away from his father and moving to another country and never coming back, right? And he grabbed her arm and yelled at her that, no, you're not taking my son anywhere, right? Is that abuse? No, that's a reaction.
That's the thing. Right. In times of high emotion, especially as somebody scares the shit out of you, you're going to behave more differently, much differently from the way you behave when you're just chilling or you've got a chance to think ahead before you do something. Hell, my dad once told me, after, I don't even remember what I did. It was probably something stupid like almost running out in front of traffic, or we have a UHF antenna at my parents' house. I mean, it's still there. The thing is still there right now. And I climbed it all the time. And, I did stuff like that all the time. I climbed on top of the garage. I stuck my foot in hot coals. I was like the most biggest nightmare of a over-curious, underthinking child. And I had just scared the shit out of my dad. He saw me do something. I almost backed off of a cliff at Hocking Hills State Park, an 80-foot cliff one time. He barely caught me. And so he's yelling at me, right?
Yeah.
And he goes into dad autopilot, right?
He's yelling
dad
at you,
autopilot
and you're backing away. Yeah.
No. That's not how. Oh, no. It was stupid. I was taking a picture of the mountain, and I'm backing up to get a wider angle. And
God.
Oh,
next thing I
no.
know, there's my dad's arm. But that's not the thing he was yelling at me for. I can't remember what it was. I just remember he went into dad autopilot. And dad autopilot with my dad's, the reason that I'm kind of a wordsmith is because I was raised by English teachers, okay? So he goes into autopilot. He starts saying every creative thing he's ever heard, including, if I ever catch you doing that again, I'm going to kick your butt up between your shoulder blades.
Yeah.
And he stopped short of the rest of that, which is, and you're going to have to unbutton your shirt to take a shit. But I got this mental image of this cartoonish, complete with sound effects, because I always had this overactive imagination, right? Instantly start giggling. And of course, there's the lecture dad going, "You think that's funny? You think that's funny?" Well, then he could see the wheels turning. My dad knew me. He knew what was going on in my head, right? So he starts giggling. And it snapped from that one to the other. And that's just the way it is with parenting and with reacting to your children or to children that you are a caregiver for. You have these moments.
Oh God.
You have these
Adrenaline
moments
is
where
a hell of a drug.
you think you want to skin your child alive, and the next moment you're like giggling together. And that does not make discipline wrong. I've seen that with women too. I had a friend who moved from a big city to a small city in Ohio so she could go to school there, and planned on moving to an actual small town when she got out of school. She was a single mom with a kid, and she moved from the city she moved from because she did not want to raise a black child in an inner city neighborhood where he would be invited. A car, so I picking her up and taking her with me when I went to school. And she's trying to get her kid around. He's like 3 years old, maybe, trying to get him around to do, the daycare thing so she can go attend class. And he was being a 3-year-old. So he is dawdling, and she finally starts, "You hurry up. We got to go now." And he turned around and he looked at her and he stomped his foot and he goes, "No." And I'm like, oh boy, I know what my mom would do. So I wasn't all that surprised, other than how big the voice was from such a small lady. I swear to you, the voice of God came out of this woman. She's like, "You don't tell me no. I am your mother." And that was like, that's me holding back the God mom voice. And she turned around and I had sat down. I was ready to say, "Yes, Mom." And she just looks at me and she's like, "I know it probably seemed a little harsh." The kid had backed up against the wall, did the little lip thing, and he went and did what he was told. And she goes, "You got to understand, even here, this isn't a big city, but even here there are gangs. And even here, if I'm stuck here and for so many years, by the time he's 8 or 9 years old, he's going to be invited in quotes, to join one." She goes, "I want him to be more scared of what I will do if he comes home a member of a gang than he is of the people who will pressure him to join it."
Well,
you have to make those decisions.
You do. And but I mean, to get to the point, that I was trying to make, is that there is something that one, and I would agree, if especially with boys, if you are a single mother, or if you do not have good support from the father of your child, like in terms of backing you up, if your child is 5 years old and you have no control over them, right? What's going to happen when they're bigger than you, right? If you do not have control of what goes on in your house as the parent, as the person who owns the house, right? what happens when they're bigger than you. But I do want to reiterate that I do think that there are extremities of human experience where people can react with violence without having an abusive personality and without engaging in a pattern of abusive behavior. That there are situations in which people will be pushed to an extent where they lash out violently, and that should be looked at as an act of violence, but should not be automatically categorized as abuse. And what I think part of the problem is in the intimate partner violence and family violence conversation is that it is all seen as abuse. So it really doesn't matter what other things are going on at the time, right? You're losing your house, your mother-in-law is fucking visiting. You just found out that your daughter is a crack addict and pregnant and turning tricks, right? And your teenage son has just he's just quit college and is blowing all of his money on freaking porn or something like that. Because who would pay for porn? And your entire life is falling apart around you, right? And you got creditors knocking at your door. And then your spouse, whether you're the man or the woman, your spouse starts something, yells something that blames you, scapegoats you, lays everything on you, right? And you react in a violent way, right? First time you've ever laid a hand on your partner, right? Feel absolutely shitty and horrible about it the moment you've done it, right? That is not an abusive marriage. That is not an abusive relationship. That is two people pushed into an extreme situation where something like that is likely to happen. And I just hate the fact that we take this sort of, and it's not just an approach through criminal law, because I think a lot of these cases could be addressed, as particularly common couple violence and reciprocal violence should be addressed through a public health perspective rather than a criminal perspective, unless it's particularly egregious. But it's not just that we deal with those cases through criminal means, but that we deal with them as if they are all evidence of abuse. We
apply a cookie cutter.
Yeah, as opposed to, okay, what was happening? It's like Bill Burr said, what was happening between these two people that they ended up here, right? That's what led up to it.
That's another issue. And I also wanted to point out something that sort of goes back to the discussion about the not being in the place of dealing with finances. There's something else that happens with women, and I think the fact that the majority of people involved in the domestic violence victims advocacy industry are women might have some not just the feminist aspect of it, but just the lack of understanding. It might have something to do with the fact that they don't understand that violence can be defensive even when a man does it, that if a woman initiates violence, that's still the first violent act in a two-way abusive relationship. And it's not preemptive self-defense like they label it. It's just violence. It's something that a lot of women don't understand. And I'm saying this from a perspective of having made my own mistakes by failing to understand this. If you don't have to go around on the defensive against potential violence, if you're not at risk of having a fight started with you on a regular basis when you're growing up because you're a boy, if you're a girl and you grow up in a neighborhood where perhaps you've never been in a fight. Or perhaps you've never dealt with a female bully. Maybe you've never dealt with a male bully. Maybe you've been protected.
Or if you've hit somebody, you could feel, if you hit a boy, you could feel reasonably certain that they would not hit you back.
Yeah, you're not. He's not allowed, right? So you grow up in a situation like that. You don't recognize necessarily what you're doing if you get in somebody's face and you harangue, especially backing them into a corner. A lot of girls and women have no idea what that does to somebody who has grown up in a neighborhood where the play is rough and tumble, where getting into fights is a regular thing, and even like I grew up in a neighborhood where you fight for fun, and that was like we would schedule fights at the park on the way home from school. I'm gonna kick your butt on the way home from school at the park at 3:30, and that was normal for us, right? But girls don't fight the same way that guys do. And they don't end fights and deal with the end of the fight the same way that guys do. And we still had that thing. Boys didn't hit girls. If a boy in my neighborhood did hit, and there were boys who would, but when the other boys found out, that boy got his ass kicked hard.
Oh, yeah.
So you end up in a situation where you get in somebody's face, you poke at his chest, you slap him because he has said something that you consider worthy of a slap. A lot of women and girls don't recognize that. Not only do they not recognize it as violent behavior, they don't recognize it as threatening behavior.
They
don't recognize it as aggression, right? And they don't recognize it as something that should trigger another person's defensive instincts.
Yeah.
Because theirs aren't trained.
They've never experienced
right
what it's like to be cornered like that and had somebody jabbing their finger into their chest or into their face. And maybe a woman,
and they've never had that used as the signal to start a fight. They've never had somebody use it as posturing. They've never had somebody walk up to them and start pounding, chest pounding and stuff like that. Because if you're a girl, chest pounding hurts. So this is something that I think in a lot of abusive relationships where it's two-way, where they hit each other and it's a regular habit and stuff. And the woman seems surprised every time the guy eventually snaps and hits back. Not the ones where she does it because the makeup sex is great or because that's the only way she understands getting his attention, or many other dysfunctional things.
Heard her.
But the ones that seem shocked every time, they get in his face and he pushes them away. And all of a sudden they act like he's violent, but they weren't. They don't understand what they're doing.
No,
they
don't.
That's something that they should be taught. This is something that you should learn growing up as a girl, not just as a guy, but as a girl, that getting in someone's face and screaming at them is violent. That poking somebody repeatedly in the chest is violent. That smacking someone across the face, regardless of why you do it, is violent. So if they didn't hit you first, then you're not entitled to do it. You're not justified in doing it. And if you do it, you're the aggressor. And that's part of the reason why there is so much domestic violence, because we do not teach girls, don't hit first, don't corner your partner, don't act aggressively towards your partner, don't physically aggress at your partner.
Yeah.
This is the biggest damage that's been done by the blinders that the domestic violence victims advocacy industry, and it is an industry, has done. And part of it is, I do believe that part of it is deliberate, but I think part of it is that a lot of women don't recognize that type of violence as violence.
They don't get it. When I first got with my guy here, he had told me, because we're living in the house now that he grew up in the neighborhood that he grew up in. And, my 14-year-old a couple of years ago was mugged on his way home from school, from the bus stop in broad daylight, right? Like 2 blocks from our home, right? So it's not the most, it's not the safest of neighborhoods. It's not the most pleasant of neighborhoods. And my guy, of course, and this is after, and a very intensive attempt by the city at rehabilitation of the general neighborhood and upgrading and gentrification and all kinds of stuff like that, right? They've tried to rejuvenate the neighborhood and eliminate some of the problems, right, since he was growing up here. And when he was younger, you know, from the time that he was about 14, 15, he had a job. He was walking home from work at night on a regular basis. And he had been jumped several times. And one time he said, after being jumped a couple of times, and then he'd been beaten up at school a couple of times as well. But after being jumped a couple of times on the way home, he was walking one night and he noticed that there were two guys walking behind him, and then they flanked him, right? And he knew what they were about to do. And the moment the one of them turned around to demand his wallet or whatever, he just started swinging and beat the crap out of both of them. And then he walked to the police station, which is actually only 5 blocks away from our house, and reported the incident and asked if he was in any trouble. And, you know, and they said, well, not unless somebody makes a complaint. And then he asked, okay, so what do I do now if they come after me? Right. And they're like, well, yeah, we can't help with that. Just go home. So he has this history, and he told me immediately about these kinds of things. And he essentially said, you know, like, I'm not an angry person. I don't raise my voice. I don't tend to be violent. But if you hit me, you're going to get hit back. It will happen reflexively, right? That's just the way it is, right? And, you know, the one time I hit him, I got hit back. And, you know, and then we sorted it out. And it's like, you know, it was an extreme situation. Emotions were high. The stakes were high. It was sort of a, is the relationship over before it even begins kind of moment. He said something really atrocious and egregious because, you know, he sometimes is capable of that. I don't even remember what it was. And I hit him and he hit me back. Like a 1/10 of a second later, it was reflexive. It was completely reflexive. Right. And I don't think he belongs in jail for that. I don't think I belong in jail for hitting him, slapping him across the face. I don't think that either of us belong in jail for that, any more than I believe that any of my kids, right, belong in jail because when one of them was 15 and the other was 14, they hit each other. Right. Yeah. Or, you know, like this is what drives me crazy about this entire debate, is this need to portray it as something that it isn't, right? You know, yes, there are cases where there is a definite pattern of abuse, where there is one spouse who is definitely coercive and controlling and abusive and physically violent and you know, psychopathic and all of those things, right? That's not the majority of cases. Yeah. The majority of cases really just could benefit from counseling and you know, like there's this tiny minority of cases where, yeah, the only solution is to put one of them in jail, break up the family, and help the other one get on with their life, right? But the rest of them are not like that.
No, and I was just going to bring up something, because you guys were talking about girls. Children are never taught that girls hitting boys is a bad thing. And I just wanted to kind of share something that had happened to me when I was younger, just because I thought of it in that situation. Basically what had happened, I think we were about 13 or 14, and somebody, another boy, had drawn a bunch of dicks on my art folder in art class, and I was none too happy about it. So I went over to him and I actually punched him in the arm, and then he actually punched me back. And then at first, my first thought was like, well, what? This guy's not supposed to hit a girl. But then I thought afterwards, but I just did the same thing to him. So that's technically fair. I mean, even though I was wronged, it was still wrong of me to react in a physical manner. And I actually never hit anybody again after that. It was kind of a learning experience in its own way. But I just thought I'd never actually really given it much thought. And my initial reaction was, oh, that wasn't a thing that was supposed to have happened.
My learning experience was dealing with a bully at the park, and it was a combination of naivety, too much television, even in a household where my television was limited because I'd go to friends' houses and watch at their house, things I wasn't supposed to watch, and dealing with a situation that was an adverse situation. I had this. She wasn't from the neighborhood. She was a bigger, older girl than me, and I didn't know her. She was completely a stranger. I'd never seen her before, and actually, I never really saw her at that park again, probably because of what I did. But she went around, like I started out, I was playing on the slide, and she did things like I was coming down, so she walked up the metal part, and so I started to go up backwards because we were apparently going up backwards, and she planted her ass in the middle of the slide and crossed her arms, so I went over and played on the swings, and she basically chased me around the entire park very slowly doing all this. Whatever you're using, I want it. Whatever you're using, I'm going to take it away from you. And I was trying not to get into a fight because I hate fighting. I actually really, really hate physical conflict. I love arguments, hate physical conflict. And so I thought, well, if I get on the monkey bars, she was one of those chubby little pop drinking kids, and I thought, well, she'll never get up there. So I was going to go up, get on top of the monkey bars, and get where she couldn't get to me. Well, she figured out what I was doing and ran after me, so I couldn't get away. And we get into this fight, and it was very awkward, and I got hit once, and I figured out from that one hit that if she got a second hit, I wasn't going to get back up. So when I managed to knock her down up there, and I did it by trying to imitate something I'd seen on TV. She took a swing at me, and instead of ducking, I grabbed her arm and yanked, and she fell. And I kicked her as hard as I could, right in the ribs. And I thought, well, that's it, the fight's over. And then she goes, "Oh!" And I thought I had broken her ribs and punctured her lungs like I saw in a movie, and I got terrified and ran home to get my mom to do something for this poor kid that I had just obviously killed. And, by the time we came back, she had recovered her breath. I had just knocked the wind out of her. By that time, too, by the time I knocked her down, there had been nobody at the park but us when the fight starts, right? By the time I knocked her down, there's 20 kids came out of nowhere, and they're yelling my name, "Go, go!" and all this style. It was awful. And so then they all razzed me for the rest of the year. Nobody runs away after they win the fight. What the heck? But yeah, they basically all said, no, she ran home. She was afraid she was in trouble. She thought you went to go get her in trouble. And I thought I was going to get emergency assistance. But at that kind of taught me, yes, self-defense is important. You must defend yourself. Bullies don't stop until you defend yourself. But you don't overdo it if you don't have to.
So you pulled a Ralphie.
Yeah, I did, and it wasn't the only time. That's the worst part, because I had experiences that sort of left me with I don't get triggered like an SJW gets triggered, but if you startle, I have a really bad startle reflex, and if you startle me in the wrong way at the wrong time, my panic reflex is to beat the shit out of you with whatever I happen to have in my hands. It's one of the reasons I will never conceal carry. That's just a responsible choice on my part. I'm not against conceal carry at all. I don't think I'm emotionally qualified for it. But And I sent a friend to the hospital in stitches because of that. When he thought it would be funny to jump out from the woods I was walking through, and he jumped out behind me and grabbed me and screamed, and I had a monopod and a camera in my hands. And so, but this is like, I learned from these experiences, that in an act of deliberate self-defense, and there's nothing wrong with self-defense. There's nothing wrong with preventing someone else's aggression from injuring you. But you use the minimal force that you can get away with. If you can pin somebody instead of hitting them, you pin them instead of hitting them. If you can walk away and they won't follow you, do it. And so on. Because afterwards, you have to remember everything that you did to that person. And you have to remember being the person who did that. That really sucks. And if it doesn't, then you need help. So,
well, I just want to relay that your startle reflex, honestly, I had a boss at my last job who used to, on slow nights, to hide around corners and jump out at people, or sometimes in cupboards. And once even in the
that would have been
fridge,
disastrous.
Once even in the fridge, and jump out at you. And she did that with me, and I hit her in the mouth. And she was she was a little bit shocked for a second, not hard, not enough to bruise or break the skin or anything, but I hit her in the mouth, and then she just was she just froze, and she looked at me, and then she burst out laughing and said, "I deserve that." So there you go. She was awesome. She was a very masculine woman in many ways. And quite similar to me.
That just makes me think of that. I don't know if everybody's seen the viral video. There's all these jump scare videos, where you have the prank with the reporter pretending to interview someone or something, and somebody jumps out of a trash can, and there's this one guy, all these people are always like, and they run away, or they jump and they look funny and everybody laughs, and there's this one guy, the interviewer's asking him questions, and then all of a sudden the guy in the scary mask jumps out of the big trash can, and the guy just clocks him right in the face.
I remember the one with the two electricians, and the one guy's wiring a light switch or something, and the other guy's eating a banana, and then the first guy pretends to be electrocuted, right? And the guy eating the banana is just absolutely oh my God, right? And he's just freaking out. And then when the other guy starts laughing, he's like, "What the fuck?" And then he slams the banana right in the dude's face. And oh God. And then there was another one that this little 8-year-old kid hiding in a trash can to jump out and scare his dad when his dad's bringing the garbage. And his dad he jumps out, and his dad doesn't even notice him and just dumps the garbage on top of him.
Oh.
That's awful. I like that.
Yeah,
but yeah, these are all things that are people don't realize that how a moment can descend into violence like that.
Oh, people are people, and what gets me is people are people, and honestly, being hit. Right. And this is another thing that really gets me about, particularly about the violence against women thing. Being hit is not the end of the world. You're not made out of spun glass. You're not super fragile. If you get slapped across the face by some freak on the subway, or pushed or something like that, or God forbid, punched, right, by someone in a bar that you started some shit with or whatever, right? Yeah, it's not fun, and it can be scary, but most of the time, the vast majority of the time, being hit is completely survivable, right? I don't understand this. Honestly, I have been hit by people who meant me harm, And I have been hit by men I was having sex with who hit me at my request. Okay? I have had men that I was having sex with who spanked me harder than my mother ever did when she was disciplining me, right? At my request. Okay? So clearly being hit in and of itself, right? Having an impact of something against your body in and of itself is not going to break you. It's not going to rupture your freaking, like, every organ in your body at once and send you to the emergency room. Like, being hit is not, like, and I hate to say it because it sounds so horrible, right? Like, being hit's not the end of the world. Being hit's not that bad. Being hit is like no big deal, right? Well, yeah, sometimes being hit is no big deal. Sometimes being hit, right, is just like, it hurts for a second, and then, like, it doesn't hurt anymore, and it might leave a little bit of a bruise, and okay. But if that's all it was, right, like, I don't understand how this can be something that sends you into, 52 weeks of PTSD therapy, right?
This is the difference between the attitude of somebody who has a more masculine understanding of interpersonal violence versus a more feminine understanding of interpersonal violence.
I think so.
Because this is something that, like I said, I grew up, my neighborhood versus the neighborhood across town from where I lived, the difference was incredible. And not that there was not relational violence on my side of town. It happened, but it was like the only thing. Relational aggression among girls was the only way they dealt with each other across town. And they didn't beat on each other.
No, they just tried to ruin each other's lives.
Each other's whole lives. Now, on my side of town, like I said, you get mad at somebody at school, or somebody would get mad at you at school, and on the way home from school, you knew that if you had to walk past the park, you had a fight scheduled, and if you didn't go and have that fight, you were going to get made fun of for the next 20 years. Hannah chickened out,
if you don't show up, it's going to be worse for you. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you get dogged by everybody, right? So you learn as a girl on my side of town to take a hit and keep moving. You learned to deal with that. You also knew that any boy who hit you was going to get in trouble for it, and you didn't necessarily understand why. And that made it very frustrating. The guys had this great game. Okay. My brother got a pair of boxing gloves. I can't remember whether it was Christmas or birthday, but he got one pair, 2 gloves. Okay. And nobody else in the neighborhood had boxing gloves. So what they did was, we had a set of jarts. Those were lawn darts, but we weren't allowed to play with them because there had been this terrible tragedy. And they've been recalled, but people didn't always send stuff back. We just had them. And I don't know why Mom never threw them away, but we took those jarts and we set up a boxing ring in the backyard.
She probably didn't throw them away because you guys weren't complete retards, and probably weren't going to throw them in the direction of kids whose heads could be
right.
They could land on.
And that's debatable, because we used to have this. Well, she got really mad about it, but we used to have a game we played with these ninja stars that my brother had. I used to have really good reflexes. And I used to be able to, like, grab those things.
Oh, is this going to be like Dennis Leary's story about him and his friend trying to shoot an apple off of his friend's brother's head? And
they used to throw them at me, and Mom came out, and what are you doing? Oh my God! It was terrible and great at the same time.
This
but
shit
the boxing
that we did. Oh
this was, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s.
I know the shit that we did back then.
But in this boxing ring, okay, so we had jarts, twine, and 1 pair of boxing gloves. And the guys would put the boxing gloves on their right hands, and they would clasp their left hands together, and they would just wail on each other with these boxing gloves. And
whoever gave first, I give, or whoever got knocked out of the ring, or if you knocked somebody down, then you won. And the person you went so many rounds, and they didn't even have a timer, so I don't know how they decided the rounds, right? But that whoever went so many rounds, could win as well. And like they really had a great time doing that. And it wasn't just, the guys the same age, just bigger guys and littler guys and everything. They really built some character doing that. And by the way, my senior year, our football team won the state championship. But the girls weren't allowed because they weren't allowed to hit us. So we couldn't get in the ring unless we got in the ring with each other. And there's the issue of getting in the ring with each other is when girls get into a fight, it's not over after somebody wins and somebody loses.
Yeah.
So, it goes on forever. And that's kind of, so we had to stand around and kind of watch and everything. But yeah, we knew we couldn't get hit back. And we knew that if we were hit by one of the boys, we had a whole neighborhood full of white knights that would stand up for us.
I just remember my sister, when she was in junior high school, had an antagonist who went by the moniker of Peanut, because apparently she'd been premature when she was born, and so her mother nicknamed her Peanut because she said she was so small when she was born she could have fit inside a peanut shell.
That's pretty tiny.
Yeah, probably exaggerating. Almost certainly. I'm pretty sure. But okay, so Peanut was this. She was the local tough in terms of the girls, right? And she lived, I don't know, about a 3-minute walk away from our house, and she had a very difficult upbringing, right? Her parents really didn't have their shit together. They had their shit together enough to own a house, but that's about it. Their yard was always actually, I'm not going to talk about that because my yard looks worse than theirs did. But essentially, she was the kid who didn't have breakfast in the morning, not because she skipped breakfast like I did, didn't want to eat breakfast, but because there was nothing in the house to eat for breakfast, right? And nothing to bring for lunch. And, so I mean, like she was this kid who was she was like hard boiled, right? And she really did not like my sister for some reason, and sort of singled my sister out. And my sister wasn't exactly the most likable person either. I will grant Peanut that much. But things came to a head, and it was all going to come down to this scheduled fight. You show up here, we're going to have it out, and then that'll be that, right? And so my sister comes home, and she finally tells my parents what's been going on, right? And that she has to essentially show up at this fight to fight this girl, right? This other girl. And my mom is, of course, and my mom is actually pretty pragmatic, and she's pretty, she's got a fairly masculine mindset and understands things like that. But she was just like, no, we should call the school, right? Because this is getting to the point where it's across the line. And my dad overruled her and said, I'll drive her to the thing. And so my dad drives her to this fight. Okay. And then there's this ring of kids around these two girls who are about to like freaking duke it out. And these boys are all trying to intervene. And my dad is pulling them out and saying, don't interfere. Let them deal with it, right? It's all fine. Let them sort it out, right? And then my sister got the shit beat out of her. She got knocked down. Everyone declared Peanut the winner. My dad took her out, got her some ice cream, gave her a cigarette, which was kind of strange since she was only in junior high, but and said, you did good, right? And then so there I am at a track and field meet a year or two later, right? And there's Peanut sitting there on the field watching everything going on. And I look very, very much like my other two sisters. And she says, "You're Vinka's sister." And I'm like, "Yeah." She says, "I'm Peanut." And I said, "I know." And she says, "You let your sister know I have a lot of respect for her. You know, she showed up. She freaking, you know, she showed up. She did what was right. She did what she had to do, right? And I have a lot of respect for her." And it's like, so I'm thinking to myself, Peanut's a guy.
Yeah, kind of.
Kind of. You
Kind
know,
of.
because
Peanut's the
it's
kind of girl I grew up around, actually. This is you just described the girls in my neighborhood, although not for the same reasoning. But a lot of them, like, now, my hometown was a small town, 8,000 people when I was a kid. I think it's got like 12 or 13,000 now, something like that. And it was east side, west side. The east side of the town was the lower income side of town, and to the north it was higher low income, and to the south it was lower low income. That's where the railroad tracks were. So that's where people could afford housing if they didn't make much money. And then you had the west side of town with the high income and the lower low income, and there were no real extremes there. There wasn't the extreme poverty and the extreme wealth because it was a very small town. But on the lower income side of town, you had a lot of latchkey kids because it was the 70s, and in lower income families, in order to pay all the bills, mom and dad both work. They both work shit jobs. They both make minimum wage or maybe a little more, and that's it. And so the kids are taking care of themselves a lot, and the food in the house isn't necessarily the best, and they're watching things they shouldn't watch on TV. And when they have a conflict in among the siblings, they duke it out and so on. And then they tell mom and dad when mom and dad get home from work, and the mom and dad have to try to sort it out without actually knowing the full story. They just get the two sides from the kids, right?
And they're too tired to fucking deal with it half the time anyway.
Right. So you basically just described a lot of the girls in my neighborhood. And there were girls that were more feminine, and there were girls that were less feminine. And the less feminine you got, the more likely, if you got in a fight with that girl, once the fight was over, the fight was over.
Yeah.
And the more feminine they were, the more likely you were going to be dealing with petty aggression forever. Yeah. And then you get hit, you cross town or start junior high, and you get girls from across town in the same classroom with the girls I went to school with. And you get this situation where you have these little prissy West Siders doing things that would get your ass kicked in my neighborhood. Yeah. And the girls from my neighborhood responded by kicking their asses, which got them in huge trouble because these were girls that never grew out of tattling because that's what they were encouraged to do at their school. So it was an interesting clash. And it was also interesting to see a unique, I guess, opportunity to see how violence is perceived depending on the appearance of the girl. And it would be more recognized, for instance,
if she's fat and ugly.
Well, no, not fat and ugly. If she's tough, if she's unemotional about it, if she if the fight's over when the fight's over, if she deals with it like a boy, in any way like a boy, even if it's not 100% like a boy, if she deals with it like a boy, and the more masculine she's perceived as being, the more her violence is recognized. And what that basically did was, that was, for me, junior high was when I really started learning how to control my temper. And part of the reason was because if I hit another girl,
even if she hit me first, I was the aggressor and I got in trouble. And if I got in trouble at school, I got in trouble 4 times because my dad was a teacher, my mom was a teacher, my aunt was a teacher, and my uncle was a retired principal. So I would get in trouble at school. I would get in trouble at home. I would get in trouble the next time I saw my aunt, and then I would get in trouble at the next family event.
Oh,
So I learned to control my temper pretty well, pretty fast. At least the physical end of it. And it was because of that. It was because when I was violent, it was treated like violence. And it actually prevented a lot of violence from happening to me because I couldn't get away with doing things that girls normally get away with doing.
Well, with me,
that's part of why I have that conclusion. I give you guys one chance to respond to that, and then I think we're going to be done because I think we've talked the topic to death, and I think we've gone off topic probably more than we've stayed on it this time around.
Well, yeah, but I mean, with me,
but it's tangents to the topic.
My lesson was, that time when I was 10, there was a 12-year-old boy who was 1 grade ahead of me, who was picking on a friend of mine, and he was actually picking up because we just had the snow plows through, so they had just plowed. And not the freshly fallen snow, but the packed down snow, right, off the roads. And so there were all of these huge chunks of hard packed snow, almost like ice, right? And this kid was breaking these over my friend's head as he was just trying to walk home. And the kid was, he was known for being an asshole, and he was much bigger than me, and I just decided to go up to him and cold cock him. And I did. I punched him right in the fucking temple. And he had no idea who he was hitting, right? Like, I don't think it even registered that I was a girl, right? He just turned around and just pounded the shit out of me and, hit me about 5 times in the face and then knocked me down, right? But it was right in front of my house, so I got myself up and brushed myself off and went home. And my mom was there. She takes one look at me, all bleeding and everything, and she's like, "Come on, let's go," and sits me on the toilet lid and gets the mercurochrome out. That's how old I am. We still had mercurochrome, which is like an iodine-based, and
it's a mix of mercury and chrome in iodine.
There you go.
They haven't sold it in stores for decades.
Yeah, because it's mercury and chrome.
Yeah,
but it's an antiseptic that used to be used back then. And she starts dabbing it on my face, and she's like, "What happened?" And I was like, "Well, Robbie beat me up." And she says, "Oh, well, how did that happen?" And I said, "Well, he was picking on Carl, so I punched him in the face." and she stops and she looks at me and she sighs and she says, "Well, what did you think was going to happen?" And I just thought about it and I went, "Okay, you got a point." And then she says to me, "If he starts bothering you now, right, you let me know. But I'm not going to go to Robbie's mother's house and rip a strip off of her because her son retaliated when you punched him in the face. So just FYI, right?" And I think that was my first lesson, because my mom was always pretty pragmatic about these things too.
All right. Well, I guess if I'm the last one, then I guess after my scenario with the guy that I clocked for drawing dicks on my art folder, I took that lesson forward, and I actually had a girl challenge me to a fight at one point on a bus a couple of years later. And I responded to her with, "No, thank you. I don't like fighting." And she actually amazingly let it go after that. She just basically looked away and started talking to the other people. And then I learned, sometimes it's better to try and talk through your issues rather than to resort to violence. But to kind of bring it all back to the way it was, something that you guys said earlier, women are human too. Humans are human, and they make mistakes, but we have to acknowledge that women are also human in the same way that men are human, and that everybody can make mistakes and learn from them. But unfortunately, they're capable of violence just the same as anybody else.
Yeah, and that's one more reason why the most dangerous place for a woman to be, not to herself, but to everybody else, is up on a pedestal. Because the moment that she falls off, you can damn well bet she's going to take somebody with her. And with that, I think we can close out the show.
Doge.
Uh-oh. Did we lose the Doge? Oh, okay.
All right. Oh my God. Close the show. God damn it.
Hold on. I'm having a
Google
issue.
You're supposed to be our producer.
The stream is being violent.
I tried to stop it.
It's the aggressive badger talk stream.
A good night, everybody. We'll see you in the after show if you're a patron. If you're not a patron, www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. Join us in the after show.